So in this environment, this person achieves unnatural prominence.
Do you think that this is the end of the issue? Or are we likely to see something, if not similar, then at least some sort of consequence of what has happened re-emerging, particularly as we head towards the presidential elections in 2024?
The degree of weakness and fragility demonstrated by the Russian political system, by the political regime in general, was such that it cannot be forgotten. You cannot unsee it. Autocracies sometimes are challenged by coups or attempted coups. But let us remember, for example, two most recent instances, the revolt in Turkey in 2016 and the events in Kazakhstan in 2020. In both cases, these revolts or coups or protests were crushed, not bargained with, not reasoned with, not compromised with, but crushed. And then authoritarian government continues more or less as before. In Russia, this last weekend, we have seen a different case. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to the individual fate of Mr. Prigozhin. I'm more interested in the fate of Wagner Group as an institution, whether they will be absorbed by the Minister of Defense or they will just disappear. This is interesting. But it's even more interesting that this would serve as an example to other groups, to other parties who may think that if the way to Moscow is so open and so free for all, they will do better next time than Prigozhin did last weekend.
Ekaterina Shulman, we appreciate you being with us on Al Jazeera, and thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a year since the fall of Mariupol. After months of fighting and the steelwork siege, the last remaining Ukrainians surrendered to Russian forces. Life in the city is gradually returning, but the trauma of what happened continues to overshadow everybody's lives. Sally Hashim reports from Mariupol.
Behind the fountains in the park lies a city in ruins. The feeling of normality here fades gradually as a drive around unveils what's left of Mariupol. Alexandra's misery started with the war, and her ordeal has never ended.
I just wish those people who are in charge of all this would hear a mother's pain. It's impossible to live. I just want to embrace my only son, alive and well.
Her son had to leave, while she stayed in Mariupol to take care of her aging mother.
We did not believe it was possible to survive. We starved for a month without water in the basement. We saw people die. We didn't go anywhere after that.
For Vanya, Arina and Lilia, the childhood was scarred with things that no one should see, especially when they are so young.
Now, when a plane flies over, I immediately remember. I am scared that something will blow up. I have started to live one day at a time. I used to put things off, but now I do them all at once. There may be no tomorrow.
Things have gotten much worse. All my friends have left. We have to look for new ones.
Just by looking at the ravaged buildings, the effects of the war can clearly be seen and also felt across all facets of life here in Mariupol. And its people bear the emotional scars of the trauma they endured. Elena Bondar survived World War II in this same city. And during the Russian push, she lived in a bomb shelter.
Russia is my native home. I'm glad now because I received a Russian passport. I'm very glad that I will die in Russia. I am a Russian. Ukraine did not give me anything good. We now sit and wait for victory.
But others in the city have a different view. They keep away from the camera, fearing the consequences of associating themselves with Ukraine. Their gaze is fixed on a distant horizon, their hearts yearning for a future not yet within reach. Ali Hashim, Al Jazeera, Mariupol.
Plenty more ahead on the news hour, including the new Prime Minister of Greece is sworn in. We've got the latest from Athens after a decisive election victory. And in sport, in Mexico make an impressive start as they look to win a record-extending 9th Gold Cup title. Football action coming up. Israel's Supreme Planning Council is set to approve further expansion of illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. Nearly 6,000 housing units are likely to be approved and 3 illegal outposts are being formalized under Israeli law. Well, the Supreme Planning Council is holding the meeting in Bet El. It's the first time such planning has been deliberated since the far-right finance minister and settler activist Bezalel Smotrich was put in charge of settlement policy. Ali Fawcett reports from the occupied West Bank.
Jamal Abu Ayash has borne an immeasurable loss in defense of a small patch of family land.
I inherited from my father, him from his father, 4 generations in the family.
His son Jamil was killed by Israeli soldiers in 2021 during protests against the illegal Israeli outpost known as Eviatar. All settlements are illegal under international law. Outposts like Eviatar are illegal under Israeli law. The government's ejected settlers from the hilltop in the past. But in 2021, it promised they could return permanently once Eviatar had been made a formal settlement. That now looks all but certain.
They will enlarge the settlement. There's nothing we can do. The Arab rulers have betrayed us. We have nothing but stones. All Israeli government-supported settlements, not only this one.
The man now in charge of settlement decisions is finance minister and far-right settler activist Bezalel Smotrich. This was him in Eviatar in April.
This place will be bustling with Jewish life, with heads held high, proud, and who love the land and the Bible.
Israel is expected to advance thousands of new settler homes on Monday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls it a response to terrorism. It's also set to initiate the formalizing of 3 outposts close to the illegal settlement of Eli, near to where a Palestinian shooting attack killed 4 Israeli settlers last week. And as existing outposts are being endorsed by this Israeli government, new ones are springing up, at least 6 built in the last week amid an outburst of violence. The Palestinian attack was preceded by a large-scale Israeli raid on the city of Jenin, killing 7 Palestinians. It was followed by a wave of settler attacks on Palestinian communities, and these hastily built new outposts, often in strategic positions between existing settlements.
This is a new danger that threatens the Palestinian population on their lands. These outposts have also become a launchpad for gangs of hilltop youths to carry out their attacks on the Palestinians and their houses in nearby villages.
From 2012 to 2022, the UN says the settler population grew by more than a third to over 700,000. But international pressure and security and legal concerns had seen some constraints on building, and especially on attempts to formalize outposts. For Israel's new government, accelerated settlement expansion is a declared priority, and legalizing outposts is becoming part of the program. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, in the occupied West Bank.
We've got two teams covering developments. In a moment, we're going to go to Nida Ibrahim, who's in Bethlehem, overlooking several illegal settlements. First, we're going to go to Imran Khan, who's live for us in the Givat Ze'ev settlement in the occupied West Bank. Imran, we're getting news lines in saying that Israeli media has apparently is saying that the officials have approved plans for 5,000 new homes. What do we know about this plan?
Well, it was to be expected. They were meeting today in Bet El to try and decide how many of those settlements they could actually pass. Some of them may not have passed due to technical specifics, but politically speaking, this is a very big victory for Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister. Now, it used to be a very complicated process to be able to approve a settlement expansion. It was 6 phases. Those 6 phases took in security considerations, political considerations. They even took in things like who was going to get the contract to actually build the settlement expansions. And there was also the Supreme Court involved as well. They simply dispensed with that last week in a cabinet decision chaired by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They handed all of those 6 phases to Bezalel Smotrich, who now is almost in total control. And because of that, they were able to approve all of these 5,000 settlements. Let me just show you what that means in the occupied West Bank where I am. So you see, that's an illegal settlement under international law. They're being constructed. Some buildings are already up. 900 new settlement units will be approved here. And there are 2 types of settlers. There are those who are economic settlers, who come here because the housing's actually quite cheap, the schools are good, and they come here because they can afford to live here rather than places like Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. And then there are the ideological settlers. These are the people who call the occupied West Bank Judea and Samaria, and they say that this land was promised to them in the Bible, and they're going to stay here. Now, these settlements have been built in increasing number since the 80s, but now they are actually changing the facts on the ground. Where I'm stood is supposed to be the state of Palestine if the 2-state solution is ever agreed upon. But when you have settlements like this in such large number, it's very difficult to get rid of these people from these permanent places. So it becomes very difficult to negotiate a state of Palestine. And that's what the Palestinians are really concerned about. But with Bezalel Smotrich almost in complete control and approving these 5,000 new settlements, he's got a success. He's got something that he can play to the gallery with. His supporters are predominantly settlers, and this is a big victory for him.
Over the last 25 weeks or so, I think Al Jazeera has been reporting on those big protests in Israel over plans to change the legal system. How much of a priority is settlement expansion for Israelis?
Well, the protests in Tel Aviv on Saturday night that get about 100,000 people are very internal Israeli politics. This is about the threat to democracy that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial changes bill is pushing through and has pushed through. They're not really concerned about the settlements per se. However, because of the way the Supreme Court's set up, it can actually stop settlement building, and that is something that they are concerned about. They're concerned about the idea that you can strip away the Supreme Court's power. Now, the far right of the ruling coalition, Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, actually says that the protesters are anti-democratic, that they don't understand what they're protesting for, that the Supreme Court has far too much power. So it's a bit of an intricate situation. But not many people are concerned about the actual settlements in the West Bank. They're much more concerned about the assault on democracy within Israel itself. But within that, the Supreme Court, of course, the settlements come into it.
Imran, thank you very much indeed. That's Imran Khan talking to us from the Givat Ze'ev illegal settlement in the occupied West Bank. Well, Israel has consistently expanded the number of its illegal settlements. Between 1967 and 2022, they built more than 290 of them across the occupied West Bank, with an estimated 460,000 settlers living there. Israel has also built several enclaves in Palestinian neighborhoods in occupied East Jerusalem, where more than 220,000 Israeli settlers live. The settlements violate international law, and the large number of Israelis who live there make it difficult to establish a Palestinian state. Nida Ibrahim is joining us live now from Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. How worrying is all of this going to be for Palestinians, Nida?
The settlement issue has been the issue that Palestinians have been talking about for years, if not decades. They say, how can we have, as Palestinians, a contiguous state with territorial continuity when Israel keeps building settlements? What happened is that in so many numerous times, Palestinians have told the international community, okay, you want us to negotiate on a state, on the 67 borders, what have you. You can't have Israel building on the lands that are going to be part of the future state. Of course, the latest such, let's say, commitment from Israel came in March when Palestinians and Israelis were meeting in a meeting under the auspices of the Americans to kind of bring a calmness to the situation here in the occupied West Bank. And there has been promises that no new announcements were made. But as you've just reported, we're seeing new illegal settlement building units are being announced. I'm standing here in front of one settlement. It is built on the lands of the city of Bet Sahour here in the occupied West Bank. This started off in the early 90s as a small settlement. And if you can see now, as it is the case with so many other settlements, they're becoming sort of like cities with playgrounds, with access to water infrastructure, electricity, roads. And on the other side of the fence, because you can see there is an Israeli-built fence here, you have Palestinians who are struggling to get water, struggling to get resources. Even their access to Jerusalem, Bethlehem is very close to Jerusalem, has been severed by those settlements, by the separation wall that has been built by Israel. When it comes to Palestinians, they would tell you that we've given the political process so many chances and they failed. Look, we're losing more lands as we speak. So for them, the armed confrontation has been really the reason or the way for them to move forward and basically make the world listen to them.
Nida Ibrahim talking to us from Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. Nida, thank you very much. 3 senior army officers in Pakistan have been sacked for failing to stop violent protests last month. Government and military facilities were vandalized following the arrest of former Prime Minister Imran Khan. More than 100 people are on trial in military courts for their involvement in the unrest. The New Democracy Party in Greece is celebrating the largest election victory there in nearly 50 years. Kyriakos Mitsotakis has been sworn in for a second term as Prime Minister. He's met the Greek president, and a new cabinet of government ministers is expected to be announced soon. It's time for the weather. Here's Everton.
Hello, it's looking pretty quiet now across the Middle East. Some subtle changes going on with our weather here. Okay, you may well see 1 or 2 showers a little further north up towards the Black Sea, just around the Caucasus, maybe even a shower or 2 there into Oman, but nothing too much to speak of. Quite a brisk shamal still blowing at present. Lifted dust and sand there to watch out for. Temperatures falling away though, 38, 39 Celsius here in Doha over the next couple of days. Winds coming in from the Gulf, so we've just pushed in just to the east of north, so it will turn cooler, but it will turn more humid because we are drawing that air across the warm and moist waters of the Gulf there, so that's something to watch out for, not too comfortable. Plenty of showers, plenty of wet weather there across central parts of Africa. Some lively storms just brewing up off the west coast there. They will push out into the Atlantic, something to watch out for next week. Could develop into tropical systems as they make their way across the warm waters there. Plenty of showers there also to central parts of Africa. South of that, quite a change into South Africa, even southern parts of Namibia, seeing some wet and rather windy weather over the next couple of days. That rain making its way further eastwards as we go through the week.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera, we're going to meet the top 2 presidential contenders after voting day in Guatemala. And in sport, a major victory for the young Chinese golfer. Her story and more coming later in the hour.
Facing realities.
Is the UN fit for purpose, or like many critics say, it's just obsolete and doesn't get anywhere near enough done for the amount of money that is poured into it?
Hard-hitting interviews.
Do you think that the reliance on Russia is enough for Mali to go on its own and build its army?
Thought-provoking answers.
For centuries, people have been taking care of art, so I have every confidence that future generations will do it as well.
Hear their story on Talk to Al Jazeera. Investigative journalism.
This was a very notorious gang area. It would have been absolutely impossible to walk freely like this before.
Global experts in discussion.
The internet did not need to be the greatest tool of mass surveillance in the history of the world.
Voices from different corners.
This is our vision. We need to do this.
Programs that open your eyes to an alternative view of the world today.
Not many people have seen this. This is special access.
On Al Jazeera.
Watching Al Jazeera, a reminder of our top stories this hour. Some breaking news. Israel's Supreme Planning Council has approved the expansion of illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. More than 5,000 housing units have been authorized. Russian state news is reporting that the head of the Wagner mercenary group is still under investigation. That's despite a recent deal granting him immunity after his forces took over military sites in southern Russia. Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, has appeared on the front line for the first time since the mutiny. Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin demanded Shoigu's removal and accused him of corruption. US President Joe Biden is back on the campaign trail. He's touring the country, outlining his government's achievements. He's expected to announce a major program to connect more Americans to high-speed internet. Well, for more on this, we're going to speak to Shihab Rutansi, who's at the White House for us. So Joe Biden pushing his achievements and outlining his future plans. He is going to have a tough time convincing some people.
He's doing terribly in the polls. You can see now why they want to emphasize what Biden has in the White House as well as achieved, and there are lots of comparisons we're expecting to President Roosevelt, who brought electricity to rural America. So with this announcement today, we're expecting more details on a plan that we'd already known was in the works, of that $40 billion to bring broadband access to every state, territory, and D.C. Then he's going on a tour. Biden, other cabinet officials are going on a tour to tout those achievements. How many states? I think it was 20 states in 3 weeks, we were told. He has a problem. Over 30% of his own party doesn't want him to run. Core constituencies, like African Americans, when asked, say they don't know what Biden's actually done anything for him. But now Biden's obviously trying to present himself as a modern day Roosevelt at a time when core parts of the base say he hasn't really delivered. 2/3 of the country feel that the country is on the wrong track. So at the very least, this is an attempt to try and address some of these appalling poll numbers at a time, and you often don't hear about this, he is facing a primary challenge. Some 30% of voters split between two candidates, Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. 30% of the party say they would vote for them. That's way more than most of the candidates in the Republican field against Donald Trump. And yet the Democratic Party's response has been, we'll just ignore them, we won't have competitive primaries, we won't have debates, and there's a lot of anger underneath the surface about that. Now, of course, we have Cornel West as well, who potentially has a chance of taking some progressive votes from Biden. But in the end, we do know what the White House strategy is, and it isn't so much to go on this victory lap that we're told he will be going on in the coming weeks, but to rely on that anti-Trump vote, assuming that Donald Trump is the Republican presidential candidate, as the Democratic Party did in the midterms. The former White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, famously tweeting, well, Emmanuel Macron got a landslide in France, and he only had 36% popularity. It was a great insight into how the White House thinks, but I think this is obviously a way, at the very least, to try and address some of Biden's appalling polling.
Shihab, thanks very much indeed. We should just point out that the RFK you were talking about there is, of course, Robert Kennedy Jr. He's one of the Democratic contenders. But Shihab, thank you very much indeed. Shihab Ratansi at the White House. Security forces are patrolling the streets of Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, as votes are counted from the presidential election on Saturday. The opposition All People's Congress is accusing government forces of attacking its supporters. Ahmed Idris is joining us live now from Freetown. How has the violence been affecting how people feel about the election, Ahmed?
Well, if you're talking to the opposition members from the All People's Congress, their mind has already been made up that this vote has been unfair and they've been treated unfairly. Now, whether or not this will be acceptable to the generality of Sierra Leoneans, it depends on what happens in this room, this hall behind me, right, in the next few hours or so. We understand that in a short time, they will probably start announcing the provisional results of the presidential election, and probably later in the evening or even tomorrow, the final results will be in. And that is when we expect to see whether or not Sierra Leoneans really accept the results of this election. But tension is on the street and large-scale deployment of security forces there.
This is the moment opposition party supporters say armed security personnel fired tear gas into their headquarters in Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown. Officials from the country's main opposition party, the All People's Congress, say several people were injured. The police defended their action.
As long as they see you sporting green, whether you are sitting on a motorbike or you are riding the keke, they will take you out and they'll embarrass you, they'll harass you. That was when I called the leadership. Since they could not respond, I called the nearest patrol to that particular location.
As the vote count continues, the APC has questioned its fairness and demanded better access for its observers. Its presidential candidate says election officials are planning to disenfranchise its supporters and deny the party victory.
APC is on an irreversible path to an overwhelming victory. Be rest assured that I, Samura Madu Wilson Kamara, and the APC party would not and shall not accept any skewed, manipulated, and unverified results.
He accused the Electoral Commission of refusing to use video projectors as it tallies the results. Election officials say no accredited person was denied access.
Yeah, they have requested us to project, but it's not possible, it's not practicable, because you have about 4 sets of tally staff who are entering the figures, and you have another set of 4 who are verifying these figures. So if you say we want us to project this figure, which one do we choose?
Initial results show the 2 leading political parties are doing well in their strongholds. Meanwhile, there is heavy police and military presence on the streets.
The exchanges between the opposition and electoral officials are making many people here in Sierra Leone nervous, and owners of shops and other businesses are watching for any sign of trouble.
The Electoral Commission says they hope to release the results early in an effort to ease tensions, but they say they can't commit to a deadline. While there is calm for now on the streets of many towns and cities, observers are concerned about unfolding events in other parts of the country. People are worried that if the situation deteriorates further, it could roll back more than 2 decades of democracy. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Freetown.
Local leaders and international observers are calling for calm on the streets of Sierra Leone. So far, things are calm on the streets with large-scale police deployment. And what happens, like we said, in this hall in the next 24 hours or so will determine whether or not the situation will remain like that. Rob?
Ahmed, and of course, you're going to be there checking that out for us as those results come in. But thank you very much indeed, Ahmed Idris, talking to us from Freetown. Widespread deforestation is putting the Congo rainforest under threat, but the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo is resisting pressure to tighten protection of the fragile ecosystem. Our environment editor, Nick Clark, reports.
No engine, just the current and paddle power. Their cargo, softwood timber, felled from the forest upstream. The journey, 1,000 kilometers down the Congo to Kinshasa. It takes a month. They just go into the forest and take the timber, they tell me. There are no rules about how much they take. Then something altogether more industrial steams by, a cargo of logs heading to the Atlantic port of Moanda for export.
It's at a very high scale because, again, I'll keep on repeating, there is no control. And when there is no control, anybody can do whatever they want to do. And that's what is happening in our forest right now. I'm not saying that we don't have regulation in this country. We do have it, but only on papers. But in terms of implementation, nothing is being implemented to guarantee that things are being done correctly.
In Bandaka, a growing collection of log rafts gathers. When there are enough, they'll set off for Kinshasa, mainly for the domestic market. One trunk alone can fetch up to $1,000. The problem is, what happens in the Congo Basin becomes more and more important as the Amazon loses its effectiveness as a carbon sink. But the government say as long as the international community refuses to honour its financial commitments, they cannot preach what DRC should do.
It's very clear the international community is not respecting its engagement when it comes to the climate and payment of carbon credits. We will not put humanity in danger, but it has to be very clear to everyone. No one can stop us exploiting our resources by saying it'll harm humanity.
DRC is one of the poorest countries in the world, and while the government wants to expand its oil, logging and mining activities, if it doesn't benefit the people, it's evident things will never improve. Another thing to take into account is the resources required to feed an exponentially increasing population. In the DRC alone, the population is expected to quadruple from 100 million today to more than 400 million by the end of the century. Meanwhile, the people of the Congo Basin live hand to mouth, taking their chances when they come, away